This afternoon's topic is iChild. Now you may be saying, well, is this appropriate for a Bible convention? What does this really have to, does this really impact us on a spiritual level? It absolutely does. The media use of our children is pulling them away from spirituality in many cases. It is one of the devil's key tactics in damaging our children and in hindering their spiritual walk. Our God is a practical God, is he not? He gives us the message of salvation, but he gives us practical ways in which we can conform our lives into his image through his help, thankfully. He gives us the health message. That we're going to hear more about that this afternoon in my mom's talk. But he also gives us practical insight into the workings of the human mind and the child's developing mind, and he gives us He opens the veil to us on how the devil is attacking our children. And that is one thing we are going to cover this afternoon. iChild. This is, let me just mention, an overview session. For those of you who at the end of this say you moved way too fast and there was more information there than I can comprehend, and maybe you didn't explain that point all the way. Yes, that's true. This is an overview of this DVD series, iChild. How electronics are programming our children's brains. This is 3 hours. We're not going to get 3 hours this afternoon, though, so that is why it's going to be a condensed version. Before we begin, though, I would like to open with another word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, that you are a practical God, that you give us practical insight, and as we look at some of that this afternoon, look at one of the devil's attacks on our children, Lord, I ask for a special measure of your Holy Spirit. Keep us attent and awake, despite the fact that we just had a wonderful meal. And Lord, please speak through me. May I only share your words and your truth. And I ask in Jesus' name, amen. Recent statistic found that children spend more time with electronic media than they do in any other activity aside from sleep. More than eating, more than school, more than playing outside, more than character development, yes, more than any other activity aside from sleep. Now, children might be getting more time in media than any other activity aside from sleep. Young people, on the other hand, are getting more time in media than any other activity, period, including sleep. The current average is 8 to 12 hours per day for the average young person spent in media of some kind, with heavy users as many as 18 hours per day. 75% of children, that's actually closer to 80% here in New Zealand, age 0 to 8 have access to or even own a smartphone, with nearly 40% of children using tablets. Now, this is just a tiny snippet of the statistics that we have on media use, but I just brought this up to show us that we are living in a generation that is different from previous generations. This media use has taken this current generation by storm. And while you may look at these statistics and say, hey, this really doesn't apply to me because my children don't use that much media, I hope not, but you'll probably agree that whether your children use 8 to 12 hours a day or zero, well, probably not zero, but maybe, an hour a day, children are using more media than they did 30 years ago, right? Whether they're using a lot or a little, they're using more than they did in the past. And so it's important that we ask the question, how is this affecting us? How is it affecting our children? We don't have to spend time on shocking statistics to know that we're immersed in a media-saturated culture, and our children are growing up in a vastly different world than we did. We use more media now than we used to. So what is it doing? I find it interesting, as a side note, that never in history have we been so connected, and yet our social lives are shallower than ever? Or never have we had so much to grab our attention while attention deficit disorders are on the rise? Is that ironic? Or never have kids had so much access to information right at their fingertips while test scores and school performance are on the decline? What gives? Eagerly, we snap up the next and greatest gadgets, and we consider them a help and an advancement in our lives. We pass them on to our children. We consider them the greatest advancement in babysitting technology of the millennium. We blindly assume that the tech companies must have assessed the effects of these fancy gadgets, and therefore they won't hurt our children, right? After all, there's so much educational value. Think of how much children can learn. But is it that simple? Is there a cost? Are there reasons for concern? Are there side effects? What are the effects of these inventions? And perhaps we need to take a step back and just say, what are the side effects? How is this really impacting us? And have the effects really been assessed before putting this stuff on the market? In reality, as I've titled, this is the first disc in the iChild series, we have been grossly uninformed. Rarely, if ever, are the effects actually considered by the market, and in fact, the research on electronics use is usually overlooked, especially by those selling the electronics. The research points to significant negative effects worth considering. Now, I do want to clarify, though, you're probably saying, well, hang on, there's a lot of beneficial things to technology and electronics. Absolutely, we're using it right here. I typed this up on a laptop, I put together a PowerPoint, you're sitting here watching a screen, I do own a smartphone, they are useful tools in our lives. But I think it's time we stopped the free-for-all and took a balanced approach and just looked at the effects. We need to be informed users. And I also believe, as we'll see from the research, that there is a difference in the age at which technology and electronics and media are used. What is good for adults may not be good for children, as we'll look at in a moment. But I like to look at it from sort of a perspective of a scale. We have benefits on one side, we have damages on the other. Will the benefits outweigh the damages, or will the damages outweigh the benefits? That's a logical, informed approach to take, is it not? What are some of the benefits often named? Well, there's educational value for literacy and numeracy. There are social benefits. There's hand-eye coordination through some games. Media can help with creativity, supposedly, although that's near to be a busted myth, as the saying goes. It can teach good values. These are some benefits of media use. I won't argue with that. But, again, let's ask the question, are there side effects? And by the way, how did children gain all these things before media came about? Were they just deficient in every one of these? So maybe there's some other ways to gain them. Okay, points to consider as we look at the fact that we have been uninformed. The first one is that of tech addictions. Let's meet William. William's a 4-year-old little boy, and one morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, William came into his dad's bedroom and woke Dad up, and said, "Daddy, I need the iPad." "Need the iPad," he said. Well, Dad marched William back to bed and told him that what he really needed was to go back to bed. But at 7 o'clock that morning, when Dad woke up, the iPad that had been beside his bed was now gone, and he found William in the living room playing a game, the battery level indicating he'd been playing that game for over 2 hours. Now, this wasn't the first time that William had been exhibiting such symptoms, and later that day, as they considered William's actions, his parents decided that he had become an iPad addict. Now you're thinking, a what? I've heard of drug addicts. I've heard of alcohol addicts. iPad addicts? Absolutely. It is a new category. We are adding to the diagnostics manual that we actually have an entire category of addictions now called tech addictions. Tablets and smartphones being some of the worst culprits there. Addictions that are just as strong as any drug addiction, and it's affecting children as young as 4 years of age. One article was titled, "Toddlers Becoming So Addicted to iPads They Require Therapy." Children as young as 4 are becoming so addicted to smartphones and iPads they require psychological treatment. William is not the only one. There are many toddlers. This particular article mentions a 4-year-old girl from the UK who had to be medically treated for her addiction to the iPad. Dr. Richard Graham began a technology addiction program in the UK a few years back, and he tells us that this is not an isolated case. There are many more addicts at this young age. And he also goes on to explain that young technology addicts experience the same withdrawal symptoms as alcoholics or heroin addicts when the devices were taken away. That's frightening. And now, to get their kids unaddicted, parents are paying Dr. Graham's clinic nearly $20,000 for a 28-day digital detox. But, actually, no, I'll get to that point in a moment. Let me mention one other quote here. Dr. Nicholas Kadaras, one of the top addiction specialist in the research field. He's told us that I've worked with hundreds of heroin addicts and crystal meth addicts, and what I can say is it's easier to treat a heroin addict than a true screen addict. This is from someone who has treated both. He says it's easier to treat a heroin addict than a true screen addict. But you may be saying, well, my child is not addicted. I hope not. That may be true. But perhaps we need to consider what constitutes an addiction. I studied into what constituted an addiction, a media addiction, and I found myself questioning my own media use. Let's go through the list briefly. And again, I explain it much more in detail on the DVD series. We're going to just run through some of this quickly. The first one is withdrawal symptoms. They find physiological withdrawal symptoms in a child or a young person who is addicted to media and is taken away from it. They did a study and they found 1,000 college students who volunteered, I'm amazed they found that many, to go without their smartphone for 24 hours. And they reported symptoms such as anxiety and actual physiological depression just from 24 hours without their phone. So if your child is irritable, anxious, sad, whatever, after having the device taken away, there is an indication that they may have an addiction. And if you know that they have an addiction and you're planning to remove this stuff, expect that they're going to have physiological difficulties, an actual withdrawal, just like taking them off of drugs. Tolerance is another one. Just like a drug addict needs stronger and stronger hits to achieve the same satisfaction from the drug, same thing here with media. Often a child who may have enjoyed it for 10 minutes now needs 30, now needs an hour, now needs 5 hours. And they're always wanting more and more. That's another indicator of an addiction. A loss of interest in other activities. A child who once loved playing outside, playing ball, picking fights with their siblings, whatever it is, hopefully not, then, but now they just want to spend time in the media. There's another indicator of a possible addiction. Lack of control. Now, 4-year-olds are not typically famous for self-control, but if we notice a child unable to control their usage, there's another indicator they're pushing toward addiction. Deception. If they're hiding their usage or denying their usage, there's another indicator. A means of escaping reality. This is one I've seen a lot, that a child, if they confront a difficult situation, they don't want to deal with it, and they turn their attention to some form of media because it takes them out of reality. And losing important opportunities, all for the importance of their media. Are these symptoms maybe more common than we'd like to admit? Again, I question my own usage as I looked at what constitutes an addiction. And okay, maybe we're not all out addicted. Maybe our children are not all out addicted. But to me, it raises some important questions. One in particular, that if media is so powerfully addicting, as we've seen, Dr. Kadaris tells us it's more addicting than heroin or drugs. If it is so addicting, there's a reason they keep drugs and alcohol away from children under a certain age, right? I'm not advocating it for a later age. Please don't misunderstand me there. But there's a reason it is illegal for under a certain age, and that is because they assume that, that is because at an early age, the frontal lobe has not developed very well. The frontal lobe is not under full development until the 20s. And so the frontal lobe is that ability that we have to decide and say, hey, I'm not going to use this substance. I'm going to control my use. And so they know that children don't have that well-developed frontal lobe to be able to control their usage. And so they legalize, it for adults because they hope that the adult can control their usage, which oftentimes, is not good. Or does not happen. But there is a difference. They draw the line with different ages for an addicting substance. That's the point I'm trying to make. So if we have an addicting substance, such as media, perhaps we need to draw a line with different ages and consider that an addicting substance should not be used freely with young children. But what are the current recommendations? You're saying, okay, you're bringing up this whole addiction idea, but what do the scientists actually tell us about what is good and what age they should start using it? Well, that's hard to say because it depends on who you ask. If you ask the American Academy of Pediatrics, for a long time they have recommended no screen time until the age of 2 years old. Just totally eliminate it. Don't even allow it. Dr. Christakis of the Seattle Children's Hospital raised that to a year later. He says up until 3 years of age. Based on brain development, we should be completely eliminating it for children under the age of 3. But Dr. Christakis and the American Academy of Pediatrics are not the only voice. Many others have urged keeping kids screen-free up until 7, 8, or even 12 years of age. Check out this article by Dr. Chris Rowan, who's a pediatric occupational therapist. She published an article titled 10 Reasons Why Handheld Devices Should Be Banned for Children Under the Age of 12. She actually is arguing that it should be illegal for children to use any form of handheld device under the age of 12. Now, as you can imagine, this generated some serious controversy. People are like, whoa, this lady went way too far. And maybe it is too far, but let's hear her out. What were some of the reasons she gave? Well, she named rapid brain growth as one reason. We know that the areas of the brain that help control spirituality, cause to affect reasoning, emotion, relationships, behavior management, language, memory, moral understanding, conscience development, and character development. Pretty important list, right? Do you want your child deficient in any of these things? No, these are critical. These are important. Why do I have this list? The areas of the brain that control these functions develop and lay the foundation in the first 7 years of a child's life. And so what do we do? At an age when they should be developing these things, we give them the iPad babysitter, which is not going to do a very good job about culturing good characters in our children. Delayed development is another point that Dr. Chris Rowan mentioned. And the reason she said that is that movement is very important. Children need physical activity. If we're eliminating physical activity through the sedentary media-based lifestyle, we run the risk of delaying their development because development is so dependent on physical activity. Obesity was another factor that she named. They did a meta-analysis, which is a review of many studies. They revealed 173 studies over a span of 30 years. Massive research project. And they found that 86% of those studies found a statistically significant relationship between increased media exposure and an increase in childhood obesity, connection to obesity. Sleep deprivation. That was another one that Dr. Chris Rowan mentioned to us. This really almost goes without saying because we've seen the ridiculous amounts of time spent in media, and obviously they're not going to be getting enough sleep if they're spending so much time in media. But what's also interesting, a study came out of Boston College, and they found that about 75% of the population of children were sleep deprived. 75%. Interestingly, about 75% of children are allowed technology in their bedrooms. Do you think there's a connection between those two numbers, maybe? Mental illness was another factor named. Aggression, attention deficit disorders, which I'll get to more in a moment. Addictions, we've already seen to be very true. And radiation emission, we know that the World Health Organization has classified cell phones as a possible carcinogen due to radiation emission, and children may be even more sensitive than adults. Pretty important list she gave here, right? Does she have some good points for eliminating it for children up until age 12? She certainly has raised some good points. So what are the current recommendations? Well, it does depend on who you ask. There's no official stance out there, but if you ask some of the top scientists in the world, they will be telling you to limit it or eliminate it for children under the age of 12. How's our scale looking right now? Ooh, it's getting a little heavy on the damages side, is it not? Oh, but there's more. Health risks. This was another one that we find a heavy contribution to in the research. Again, they did a meta-analysis of 173 studies over a 30-year period, and they looked at the relationship between media use and health. And they found, and again, I go into all these studies in the iChild series, but we'll just look at a bullet-pointed list here. They found links to childhood obesity, to tobacco use, to drug use, to alcohol use, to lower academic achievement, to earlier sexual behavior, attention deficit disorders, and hyperactivity. All through this massive research project they did comparing 173 studies, they found links to each one of these and more media use. Eye damage. This is a major problem. We're going to spend a few more minutes on this one. Media is very damaging to our eyes for a couple of reasons. They found recently that 65% of Americans are reporting symptoms of digital eye strain. Digital eye strain. Now, they also found that about 75% of the younger generation is experiencing digital eye strain. What is digital eye strain? Well, I'll get to that in a moment. We also noticed, we talked about this yesterday, that the rate of nearsightedness in the U.S. has increased 66% since the 1970s. What else has increased since the 1970s? Media use? Absolutely. We also found that children who spend less time outside were at greater risk of developing myopia. And we saw what was the reason for that, we talked about yesterday? The light, right? The bright light that they're experiencing outside is beneficial to the eyes and stopping the development of myopia. Now we know that close-up work is very damaging to the young eye. We talked about that yesterday, how distance vision is more relaxing. We bring it up close and it can cause myopia. Combine the up-close work with not being outside and you have an even greater problem for the development of myopia. But even more than that, on top of it, screens are not even close, are not only close and indoors, they also emit something known as blue light. Blue light, now this is not just if you're looking at your phone and it's emitting something the color blue. This is the term used to describe a particular wavelength of light. Let me explain. Light exists on a spectrum, as we know, and there's the visible spectrum. We have the red over here moving all the way over to the blue on the other side, and this is our visible spectrum of light. Any light that we can see falls within this spectrum. Now, we also know that the light here in the red area is long wavelength and low energy. As we move over this direction toward the blue, the wavelength of the light becomes shorter and it becomes higher energy. And we also know that if we take past the visible spectrum on the high energy spectrum and we go just outside of it, we get into ultraviolet light, which the sun has a healthy dose of, as I discovered the hard way a few days ago when I got a sunburn, right? That's the result of high energy, ultraviolet light, which is just past the visible spectrum on the blue side there. Now, our screens are chock full of blue light, and there's something else that's interesting. Let me actually go back to the spectrum here. Our eyes have natural filters in them that cut out the great majority. About 98 to 99% of ultraviolet light is filtered by our eyes. People lived without sunglasses for thousands of years. And, I'm not saying that sunglasses are bad, but they're not necessary for the eyes because our eyes have a God-given filter to cut out the ultraviolet light, thankfully. Otherwise, our eyes would be damaged by it. But obviously, if we go into the visible light area on the blue side, our eyes are not going to filter that because God wanted us to be able to see it. Now, if we understand that, we can move into our screens here. They are emitting, let me go to the next quote, the light from our devices is short wavelength enriched, meaning that it has a higher concentration of blue light than natural light. Again, it's not the color of the object you're looking at on the screen, but it's the nature of the illumination of the screen that is short wavelength enriched. It has a high concentration of blue light. It's high energy. But because of the filters on the eye no longer being activated, because we're within the visible spectrum, we start to see a problem. Blue light penetrates all the way to the retina, which is the inner lining at the back of the eye. In other words, it's bypassing the eye's natural filters. Laboratory studies have shown that too much exposure to blue light can damage the light-sensitive cells in the retina. This causes changes that resemble those of macular degeneration, which can lead to permanent vision loss. Does that make sense? You understand how this works? Visible spectrum, our eyes are not filtering it, and yet it is still very high energy enriched. It's bypassing the filters, it's going right to the retinas, it's essentially just burning holes in our retinas, and it is damaging them and leading to macular degeneration and permanent vision loss. Combine that with being up close, and you have a deadly combination for the eyes, leading to myopia and macular degeneration. And I probably don't have to explain that this is not going to make it any better, right? What is this? Virtual reality, is that what that's called? Yeah, that's certainly not going to help the eyes. Let me clarify, though, not all blue light is bad. Sunlight has a lot of blue light in it, and we know that this type of light helps us with alertness, with mood, cognition, memory, and most importantly, it is very important for regulating the body's circadian rhythm. And yet here we see another problem. Sunlight has a lot of blue light in it, important for maintaining our circadian rhythm. Screens have a lot of blue light in them. Do you think they're affecting our circadian rhythm? Absolutely they are. Blue light affects the levels of sleep-inducing hormone melatonin more than any other wavelength. Healthy sleep patterns and deep sleep in particular are dependent on normalized circadian cycles and adequate melatonin secretion, which is suppressed by both screens and man-made EMFs. Deep sleep is essential for critical thinking, focus, memory, and mood. That comes from Dr. Victoria Dunkley. Eye damage. That's a serious concern we need to consider. And you'll probably realize that this does not just apply to children. This is going to affect adults as well and our eyes. There's not a lot we can do about helping the eyes. There are filters that we can get on our screens, blue light filters. You'll find them for apps for your phone, or some devices have them built in. You can get programs for your computer. That cuts a lot of the blue light out. I encourage you, if you're just reading, if you have to spend time on the screen, turn that on, and it's definitely going to help. It's not going to hurt. But again, it doesn't totally eliminate it, and we are damaging our eyes. And of course, I spend a lot of time on the computer just by necessity for the work that I do, but I try, when possible, to spend the time on it in the morning versus the evening, where it's not going to impact my circadian rhythm as much or as negatively. Do what you can to combat the effects. Again, I understand it's a tool and something that we do spend time in. Point number 5, moving along here, interactive media. You may be asking the question, as we've looked at tech addictions and what the recommendations are and the health risks and the eye damage, okay, I can see all this applying to television, but isn't there an exception made with interactive forms of media? The forms of media that are good, they get children involved. Are those good? Well, a study came out recently that was titled, here we go, this is again by Dr. Victoria Dunkley, Interactive Screen Time is Worse Than TV. Now that caught my attention. Because supposedly here was a good form of media, and she says, oh, this is worse than TV. We know all about how TV is bad, but here she says this is even worse. Well, let me explain. She is a pediatric psychiatrist, and she's done extensive research and treatment on children of many ages, hundreds, thousands of children. And she said that back in the day, she used to remove, when she had a child come in that she was asked to treat for a various psychiatric disorder, she said she would always remove the television. And she said more often than not, when just removing the television cured the child's problem. She said, I had to do no other treatment, just taking the TV away fixed the problem. She said, but now in modern days where we have all the forms of interactive media, the iPads and the computer and the smartphone and educational media, she says, my treatment programs weren't working anymore by taking the television away. She said, I realized I had to take the interactive media away also. But then she did an interesting experiment. And she started taking away the interactive media, but she would allow them to watch television still. And she said her treatment program still worked, even with the television allowed, but removing the interactive media. She says if even a small amount of interactive screen time remained outside of school, the intervention wouldn't work. She's done clinical observations on hundreds of patients. The typical overstimulated, impulsive, hyper-aroused kid on screens, the dramatic changes in mood, focus, and compassion capacity while off of them, even if TV was allowed, and the setbacks that occurred when the handheld devices returned. And she said that in her research, just 30 minutes of either computer use or gaming caused disturbed sleep and daytime fatigue compared to 2 hours or more of TV required for similar effects. In other words, you had to watch TV for 2 hours to get the same bad effects that you got from computer use or gaming for a half an hour. Essentially, it's like computer use, gaming, the interactive forms of media are like television on steroids. They're intensified television, making it even worse. And she explains why. She says that the very interactiveness is overly stimulating to the nervous system, especially a developing one, via sensory and circadian reactions and psychological and physiological hyperarousal. Once the arousal stress cycle becomes chronic, it will eventually cause damage to the nervous system. And now, notice what she says. This is important. I want every parent to hear this. Mere moderation of screen time is often not sufficient to interrupt this vicious self-perpetuating cycle. She said in her research, she couldn't just limit it. And I hear this from parents all the time. Oh yeah, I'm going to cut back a little bit. She says that doesn't work. If your child's having a problem and it's affecting them negatively, it doesn't work to just limit it. You'll have to completely eliminate it. And of course, then you're going to go right back to the first point that we talked about with tech addictions. We know that this media is very addicting. And when you eliminate it from your child's life, you're going to be running into withdrawal symptoms, and that's going to be a difficult thing. Remember Dr. Richard Graham, he said 28 days was the time period that he gave for his treatment program, his digital detox program. Point number 6 on our uninformed overview is the work of Dr. Jane Healy. You saw the book I had back there, Endangered Minds. She's done extensive research on media and its impacts on children. I'm going to just quickly run through these. Again, I explain them more in depth on the iChild series. It overstimulates children and creates a passive withdrawal, causes attention and listening problems, emphasizes skills which do not transfer well to reading or listening. It requires less mental effort than reading. It shortens the time children are willing to spend on intellectual problems they are set to solve. It artificially manipulates the brain into paying attention, and I'll get to more of that in a moment with attention deficit disorders. It also induces neural passivity and reduces the brain's ability to remain actively focused on a task. We're actually decreasing problem-solving time. And lastly, speaking about television, and we know that many forms of interactive media are even worse, has a hypnotic and neurologically addictive effect on the brain by changing the frequency of its electrical impulses in ways that block active mental processing. That is really scary right there. And in fact, this is something that I hear a lot as parents are like, oh, hang on, as we're in this media discussion, as you're telling me I shouldn't be giving my child my iPad, you've just taken away my best babysitter. And I say, she's like, there's nothing that holds my child's attention like the iPad. And I say, you're absolutely right. It's engineered to do that. That shouldn't be a surprise. It will hold their attention. Why? Because it's designed and engineered to be hypnotic. It will hold their attention. The question should not be whether it holds their attention, but whether it's good that it's holding their attention. So, how's our scale looking right now? Yeah, a little heavy on the damages side, right? We have been uninformed. And that's the point I want to make in this quick little overview of the uninformed aspect of this series, is that there are many negative effects that we often don't hear talked about by the companies that are selling this media. And in fact, that brings us to our next topic, uneducated. You may be saying, okay, I got the idea about entertainment media, that's bad, but what about educational media? Don't children need the educational media to learn well? Well, how did they learn well before educational media? Again, I would like to ask that question. But is it helpful? What's the research really saying? Before I do, though, I can see most of you had a really great lunch. Why don't you stand up for just a moment and take a deep breath? Take a quick stretch, arms over your head, take a deep breath. You can just feel that oxygen now getting to your brain, right? All right, very good. Excellent. Have a seat. Educational media. Now for sure, kids can learn some things from educational media, definitely. But just as we saw in the points in the previous session, we should ask the question, are there side effects? Let's first of all take a look at a school district in the U.S., in Arizona, known as Kyrene School District, in an article titled, In Classroom of the Future, Stagnant Scores. Kyrene School District has decided to be innovative. They've gone all out when it comes to educational media, and since 2005, they've spent nearly $33 million on educational media since 2005, and they have an additional 40-some million that are slated for the budget. So if anywhere should be seeing some gains and improvements from educational media, it ought to be Kyrene School District. Am I correct? How's it going? Well, since 2005, the very date where they started the educational media program, scores in reading and math have stagnated in Kyrene, even as statewide scores have risen. Well, maybe it's not going so well. The district superintendent, David K. Schauer, was asked about the program and said, how do you feel it's going? Do you think it's been worth all the money that you've spent on educational media? He said, I quote, "My gut is telling me we've had growth, but we have to have some measure that is valid, and we don't have that." My gut is telling me? Is that reason to spend $33 million with an additional $40 million on the budget? No, that is hardly not a good reason. Now, I understand test scores can go up and down for various reasons. Maybe this isn't the only problem. Maybe it's not the educational media. But if we look across the country of the U.S. and around the world, schools are spending billions of dollars on technology with little proof that the approach is improving even basic learning. They did a study, a $10 million study, no doubt from taxpayers' money, of 15 educational software products. It is the most extensive federal study yet to follow methods that the U.S. Department of Education considers scientifically rigorous. Major research project here. And they wanted to see, are the educational software products helping? They compared many different, like I said, 15 different ones. They looked clearly at the results. This was a scientifically rigorous study. What did they find? Quote, no difference in academic achievement between youngsters who used the technology in their classrooms and youngsters who used other methods. No difference. Another study in 2009, a review by the Education Department of research on online courses, which more than 1 million K-12 students are taking, found that policymakers lack scientific evidence of their effectiveness. Much educational software is not an improvement over textbooks. Now, Tom Vander Ark used to work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He is now an investor in educational software. Now let me ask you, if you were investing in something, heavily investing in it, and somebody came and asked you about the product that you were investing in, would you say, oh no, it's not very good, don't bother buying it. I know I'm investing in it, but it's really not a very good product. Would you say that? No. If you're investing in it, you are going to talk it up and try to sell it as much as you can, because every time that product sells, you make money. Tom Vander Ark was asked, he spent probably millions in educational media. He says, the data is pretty weak. It's very difficult when we're pressed to come up with convincing data. The man investing in it, this is the best he could say for the products he's investing in. One study found that the more technology was used to teach a particular course, the fewer the students who felt they were able to get something out of that course. Now, you may be saying, well, I've heard all these studies about how beneficial it is. Well, when they look at the short term, it often does boost test levels. Because it's grabbing the child's attention, on a short-term study of a year or two, you might see some initial gains. But if you look at long-term studies, that is when we start to see that it's not really helping in the long run. I find it interesting, there's a system of schools known as Waldorf schools. You probably have some here in New Zealand. And I'm not here advocating Waldorf schools, but I'm just making an interesting point out of them. They believe that children should have time in play. They should do artistic work, should be involved in singing, games, stories, outdoor time, practical tasks, cooking, cleaning, and gardening. Sounds like a pretty great family, right? This is what they believe children should be involved in. They say that the classroom is intended to resemble a home, with toys and tools usually sourced from simple natural materials that lend themselves to imaginative play. A really radically different school system here. But what is even more unique about them, they have a no media use policy under the age or under 8th grade, younger than 8th grade. So how's it going for them? These backward schools who are not adopting technology, how's it going? Are the students graduating incapable of handling real life? Hardly. Most of them go on to, they produce some of the best students, with most of them going on to very prestigious universities. But what's even more interesting, and the particular reason that I brought up this school system, is that there are an unusually high number of Waldorf schools in and around the Silicon Valley. The Silicon Valley, where many of the big tech company CEOs send their children to Waldorf schools, tech-free schools. Why? Because they are tech-free. The chief technology officer of eBay sends his children to a 9-classroom school here in the Waldorf School of the Peninsula. So do employees of Silicon Valley giants like Google, Apple, Yahoo, and Hewlett-Packard. Alan Eagle, a computer scientist who works in executive communications at Google, says, I fundamentally reject the notion that you need technology aids in grammar school. The idea that an app on an iPad can better teach my kids to read or do arithmetic, that's ridiculous. Chris Anderson, CEO of 3D Robotics. My kids accuse me and my wife of being fascists and overly concerned about tech, and they say none of their friends have the same rules. Well, that's because we've seen the dangers of technology firsthand. I've seen it in myself, and I don't want that to happen to my kids. How about Steve Jobs? You would think the Jobs home must be a technological paradise, right? The walls must be made out of iPads, right? Every child must have every gadget he wants. Well, he was asked one time, what his kids thought about the new iPad, the one that's so great for learning and has all these great educational programs on it. He said, I quote, "They haven't used it. We limit how much technology our kids use at home." The people selling it, the people inventing it, the people saying it, this is all beneficial and great educational. They say, we don't let our kids use it because we've seen the dangers of it. Alan Eagle, the one I mentioned earlier, who said, I reject the notion that an iPad can teach my kids better than a real teacher. He was asked, or he actually said, my daughter doesn't know how to use Google, and he works at Google. He was asked, though, well, how's your daughter going to survive in the real world? I mean, they have to learn how to use technology somehow. He said, I quote, "It's super easy. It's like learning to use toothpaste. At Google and all these places, we make technology as brain-dead easy to use as possible. There's no reason why kids can't figure it out when they get older." That's pretty insightful from the people who are selling it and manufacturing it. But talking on educational media, there are some other much more serious negative effects. What about attention deficit disorders? Obviously, being able to pay attention to something is very important for learning skills. And aside from just learning and paying attention in school, we want to have good attention skills. So, is media and technology use impacting attention? It certainly is. I looked in the dictionary at the definition of attention to get started here. It was defined as a concentration of the mind on a single object or thought. Now, I found this rather interesting because if you look at most educational media, especially that media used today, is it a single object or thought? Or many? In the course of a minute, you might have 100 different things, right? And that's precisely the problem. It is designed to hold attention. As we saw earlier from Dr. Jane Healy, through the quick movements, sudden noises, bright colors, and things like that media is made out of, it capitalizes on the brain's instinctive response to danger. The brain says, whoa, that's scary. That's essentially what's happening in the brain, even though the child might not say it's scary. The brain is registering that as something they really need to pay attention to because this might be a danger. And that's exactly what's going on as we put them in educational media. It's holding their attention because it's forcing them to pay attention through capitalizing on the brain's response, instinctive responses to what they're viewing. And in fact, a child's ability to stay focused on a screen, though not anywhere else, is actually characteristic of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Much of the early development of physical and mental skills and their foundations in the brain comes from experimenting and solving problems with real-world materials. And the screen is just not very real-world. So what happens? Well, she explains, the long-term outcomes of forcing children's attention unnaturally may have even more serious implications than we have realized. Most children's programs are planned with an eye to capitalizing on the involuntary responses of the brain. So, what happens? As children are conditioned to having something else hold their attention, they lose the power to hold the attention for themselves. Does that make sense? Do you understand how I arrived at that conclusion? As children are conditioned to something else, always forcing them to pay attention, it's hypnotic, it's engineered that way, it's holding their attention. When we remove them from that environment, we place them in the real world that is not so attention-grabbing, they lose the power to hold their attention for themselves. So, of course, school, books, and study no longer seem interesting compared to those educational media devices. Dr. Dimitri Christakis of the Seattle Children's Hospital tells us that in the last 50 years, we've created platforms in which we present things in surreal time. It's not real world. So when you condition the mind to become accustomed to high levels of input, there's a chance that reality can just become boring. Essentially, when it comes, I'm going to skip through just because for sake of time, I'm going to move right here to this. When children report non-screen activities as boring, have you ever heard that? Oh, that's boring. I don't want to do this other thing. The screen is more interesting. When children report non-screen activities as boring, this should be a red flag to parents and educators. The child has become accustomed to an unnatural level of stimulation. And as Dr. Jennings Bryant of the University of Alabama, he has served on the research and planning committee for some of the top educational media programs in the world. He says, we work so hard to grab the child's attention that sometimes I'm afraid we forgot the learning. We have created a child who was so reinforced to go after the excitement and rewards that the learning was almost secondary. And, I think in my own life, actually, when I was a child, my grandmother was a teacher, and she was first on the bandwagon with educational media. And she had this old Mac computer that must have been one of the first computers invented, I think. And, and she had found this educational program that was teaching me about something. And the more right answers I got, the more I got to play this game involving a mouse getting some cheese and not getting caught. I don't remember the whole thing exactly. But as I was thinking about that, I realized that I could not remember what the educational content of that game was back when I was 5 or 6 years old. I could not remember what I was supposed to learn. What I did remember was the game I got to play as a reward for getting right answers. My grandma looking at me playing that game, though, probably thought, wow, he's learning so much. Look at all the right answers he's getting. I was getting right answers. Why? Because I wanted to play that game with the mouse getting the cheese. That's what Dr. Jennings-Bryant is telling us. We work so hard to grab the child's attention, we forget the learning. More studies. ADHD. I'm just going to quickly run through some of these. The research is out. You may hear it in the media that, we don't have any conclusive studies that show it's connected to ADHD. Look, we have a plethora, numerous, very conclusive studies connecting media exposure and ADHD. It is very clear in the research. According to a meta-analysis, 69% of 173 studies found connections with ADHD and other attention problems. The Journal of Pediatric Psychiatry, here we go, the American Academy of Pediatrics did another study, again found clear connections. Dr. Dimitri Christakis found clear connections. Everyday Health did a study and assessed viewing habits of 1,300 children, and they found that they were 1.6 to 2 times more likely to have attention problems. They did a combining research from 50 studies in Psychology Today, and they found another link with ADHD. Dr. Victoria Dunkley has found connections with ADHD and media use. Look, the research is out there. It is very, very clear. And as Herman Maurer put it so well, we are heading toward a global attention deficit syndrome, if we're not already there. Moving quickly, though, point 2, digital dementia. Digital dementia, you say? What's that? Have you heard of dementia before? At what age does dementia usually strike? Later on in life, right? Typically. Unfortunately, though, we now have a phenomenon known as early onset digital dementia. This was first discovered in South Korea, and they found a deterioration in cognitive abilities in teenagers that is more commonly seen in people who have suffered a head injury or psychiatric illness. They did a study in the US and found 14% of young people aged between 18 and 39 complaining of memory problems. Now, part of this just goes without saying, right? We're depending on something else to always hold the information for us, and so we don't have to remember it for ourselves. And in fact, that's what one study found, that individuals who rely heavily on technology may suffer a deterioration in cerebral performance, such as short-term memory dysfunction. Many children don't memorize anything because they can Google it. And again, this is backed up. There's been 2 studies that I know of that have looked into this and found actual deterioration in the brain, physiological changes with technology overuse. There's still more research that needs to be done on it, but it is cause for concern. Point number 3, brain imbalance and right hemisphere damage. Again, this is initial research. We're really not clear on a lot of it, but a doctor in South Korea has proposed to us that overuse of smartphones and game devices hampers the balanced development of the brain, and that heavy users are likely to develop the left side of their brains, leaving the right side untapped or underdeveloped. Now, this could be a problem. Remember what we talked about yesterday with the right hemisphere? How it's very important for spiritual strength and understanding? Think the devil might be up to something here, damaging the right hemispheres of our brains? Quite possibly. We know that people who have right hemisphere damage typically have difficulty with paying attention, with perception, with learning, memory, organization, insight, orientation, poor social communication, difficulty with recognition and expression of emotion, and difficulty reasoning and problem solving. Have we seen all of this happening in society today? Absolutely. So while the research may not be completely out there about is it actually damaging our right hemispheres, we can just look at the symptoms of right hemisphere damage and say, hey, there might be some connections there. And, of course, spirituality, decline in spirituality associated with right hemisphere damage. But what's even worse is an area of the brain known as the anterior cingulate cortex. This is a very important part of our frontal lobes, right here in the yellow colored region. That is the anterior cingulate cortex. The ACC is very important for impulse control, decision-making, emotion, controlling emotional responses, attention, motivation, error detection. Do you think that's important for Christians? And the center of the free will, critical area of our brains. Damage to the anterior cingulate cortex often results in OCD, PTSD, depression, addictions, poor emotional regulation, poor motivation, neuroticism, sensation seeking, and impulsivity. Critical area of the brain we don't want to be damaged. Why am I bringing this up? Something known as media multitasking. Have you ever watched a video and texted somebody at the same time? Have you ever done a research project on the computer where you Google and then you switch back and forth and you type in a search term and you copy and paste and then you paste it into your Word document. You go back, you try another search term and the first link doesn't work, so you try another search term and then you click on the first one and oh, that's interesting. You go back and you click on the second one and oh, that's interesting, and you go back. I mean, that is how we do research, right? Bombarding ourselves with constant changes of activity in what we're doing. That is another format. Media multitasking is not necessarily using two forms of media at the same time, but just quickly changing back and forth and using many forms of media within a given amount of time. What is this doing? Well, a recent study came out that showed us that higher media multitasking activity is associated with smaller gray matter density in the anterior cingulate cortex. Smaller gray matter density. Now, just to clarify, if you're not a brain scientist, you're like, is that a bad thing or a good thing? It's a bad thing. You don't want decreased gray matter in an area of the brain as important as the anterior cingulate cortex. The ACC is generally thought to be involved in error or conflict detection, critical area of the brain that we don't want to be damaging. So, have we seen enough? Are these some really good reasons to be dialing back on media and maybe not piling on the educational media for our children, because all of these things will be impacting their educational and learning abilities? Most certainly. In the last few minutes that we have, though, I want to move to a quick overview of the last disc on the iChild series, and that is unreality. Unreality. Now, I know that's not a word. I kind of made that up. But it struck me as a brain researcher as I started seeing children growing up in a world that was not real. That was not real life. It was not how it used to be. What used to be reality has now moved into the screen. Is it damaging them? We know that the environment of a child literally shapes their brain. So what's this new environment doing to them? One study found children learn to tie shoelaces later than ever before. Today's children now learn how to operate complex technology long before they know how to tie shoelaces. Media is damaging to a child's sense of reality. Children develop their sense of what is real and what isn't, and what psychologists call reality testing between the ages of 3 and 10. If they are exposed to reality blurring imagery, as the screen is, that's not real life, during that key developmental stage, it compromises their ability to discern reality. It is overstimulating. We talked about that on yesterday about the overstimulated lifestyle not being good for the development of the brain. We also know that it's attention grabbing and addicting, which is not real life. Real life does not grab your attention like the screen does. We also know that it's not real world communication. Children have vastly stunted communication skills in today's day and age. In fact, they did a study, shocking study, in Canada where they found that parents on average spent 3.5 minutes per week participating in meaningful conversation with their children. 3.5 minutes per week. That is really sad. And of course, it goes without saying that an electronic machine of whatever description does not engage in two-way conversation, which children need to be confident communicators. So it's overstimulating, it's attention-grabbing and addicting, it's not real-world communication, it's also not real-world interaction. They need physical, hands-on, three-dimensional interaction, and they are not getting that when they are on a screen. You just push a button and you get a result. What did life used to be for the child? Well, they played outside. They got plenty of physical exercise. They helped with the daily work inside and out. They learned by exploration. They experienced real-life consequences. They learned with paper, pencil, textbooks, and a human teacher. Isn't that what real life used to be for a child? It is. But unfortunately now, we have pushed that aside and replaced it with the screens. So now instead of playing outside, they're playing on their smartphones. Instead of the physical exercise, they're sedentary, indoors, watching TV. Instead of helping with the daily work, they've replaced the work with screen-based entertainment. Instead of learning by exploration, we spoon-feed them pre-baked creativity. They don't have to imagine anything for themselves. It's already been imagined for them. Instead of experiencing real-life consequences, when you drop something, it breaks, right? Now you just press reset or Control Z here in New Zealand. No real consequences felt. While they used to learn with pencil, paper, textbooks, and a human teacher, now it's ebooks, interactive whiteboards, and educational games, which we've already seen are not really benefiting them in the long term. And yet the research shows that children who play outside are more fit and healthy. They have stronger immune systems. They have more active imaginations. They're more creative. They have reduced stress and lower anxiety, less aggressive and violent behavior, increased attention span, better cognitive functioning, and the fresh air gives them stronger immune systems, fewer allergies, lower incidence of asthma, improves oxygen flow to the brain, contains phytoncides, which are important chemicals that help with brain development that comes from the plants. We know sunshine provides vitamin D, improves eye health, may reduce the risk of diabetes and heart disease, raises serotonin levels, and positively affects sleep. We saw that screens were negatively affecting sleep by adjusting the circadian rhythm and melatonin levels. Real life, as it used to be, had some serious benefits, and we've replaced it. What kind of mud do you want your children playing in? What kind of gardening would you like them doing? And of course, if your child can use a smartphone, they can easily operate any of the above. Again, this is the way real world used to be. And yet, it's almost child abuse to make your child do their chores. Things have really been perverted and changed. So what have we seen? Oh, and let me just mention also, it's not just the children. Please, parents, take a look at your own device usage and devote your time to the important work of raising your children. What have we seen? In a brief summary, we've seen media is highly addicting. There are many health risks. There's eye damage, permanent eye damage, negative effects from the blue light, interactive media more damaging than television. Educational media is not helping. It's causing attention deficit disorders, digital dementia, brain imbalance, right hemisphere damage, anterior cingulate cortex damage. It's overstimulating, it's not real-world communication, and it's not real-world interaction. Have we seen enough? Do we need more evidence that tells us, look, we need to be really careful about how we are letting our kids use the media? It was Dr. Raymond Moore who told us quietness, calmness, and freedom from interesting, artificial excitement builds strength in the immature child. And the book Child Guidance tells us that the more quiet and simple the life of the child, the more free from artificial excitement. There it is again. And the more in harmony with nature, the more favorable it is to physical and mental vigor and spiritual strength. God's plan is good, isn't it? He knew what he was talking about. So I believe we should just sort of inject this whole discussion with a bit of common sense. Again, I realize technology is an important tool that we can use in our lives, but let's take an informed approach, realize that there are some damages to us as adults, use it carefully, use it as a tool. And when it comes to children, we need to realize their brains are even more susceptible to damage, and when possible, we should be completely eliminating it for them under the age of 12. And again, if I move too fast, if you want more information, more explanation, deeper explanation, you want to look more at the quotes, pick up an iChild series, and there's a lot more in there. Shall we close with prayer? Father in heaven, thank you for the time we've had. Thank you for the research that we're able to access now that helps us understand the devil's attacks. And Lord, I just pray again for the families and parents here, the grandparents, the teachers, whoever they may be, who are involved with children and who want to do what's best for them. Give them wisdom to work with them and to give them the real life that you designed for them and not the media-saturated one. Thank you for the time we've had, and we continue to ask for your blessing upon our day. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.